Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into what a recent analysis calls a security puzzle on Israel's northern borders. The argument is that, despite all the diplomatic talk, the tension we're seeing right now, well, that might just be the new normal.
So the big question we're tackling today is this: why? Why does this conflict just keep grinding on? With all the effort from the international community, why haven't we seen a stable peace in Lebanon and Syria? The answer, according to the source material we're breaking down, is actually pretty fundamental.
And here it is, the core idea of the analysis. It basically says that the fundamental conditions that Israel says it needs to safely pull its troops back from those forward positions, they just don't exist. Not really. And there's a strong argument that they won't exist anytime soon. So what are these conditions, and why are they so hard to meet?
According to this analysis, the whole thing comes down to what it calls an unbridgeable gap between what the different sides want and need.
And you can see that gap crystal clear in Lebanon. It's a total deadlock that pits Israel's demand for disarmament against Hezbollah's very reason to exist.
Okay, so the official basis for Israel's position is a UN Security Council resolution, number 1701. It was adopted way back in 2006, and its language is pretty clear. All armed groups in Lebanon need to disarm, and the whole area south of the Litani River is supposed to be a weapons-free zone, with only the Lebanese army and the UN allowed.
Now for Israel, especially after what happened on October 7, 2023, this isn't just some point to haggle over in negotiations. The analysis we're looking at frames this as an absolute existential need. The whole point is to make sure Hezbollah's elite Radwan fighters can never, ever be in a position to invade northern Israel.
And when you look at the sheer scale of the threat, you can kind of see why Israel is so dug in on this. The analysis points out that before the 2024 conflict, Hezbollah was sitting on this enormous arsenal. And even after taking some serious hits, the group can still fire off dozens of rockets every single day. But then you look at the other side, and Hezbollah's position is just as rigid. This quote from their leader, Naim Qassem, says it all. For them, disarmament isn't a compromise. They see it as a demand for total surrender, and that's something they just flatly refuse to do.
So this is the collision course. Israel demands disarmament to feel secure. But for Hezbollah, these weapons aren't just weapons. They are the very heart of their identity as an Iranian-backed resistance. It's the source of their political power inside Lebanon and their whole purpose in the wider region. The analysis argues that if Hezbollah gave up its arsenal, it would essentially be committing political suicide.
So what's the result of this deadlock on the ground? Well, according to the analysis, it's these 5 IDF outposts that are now sitting inside southern Lebanon. And these aren't seen as temporary bargaining chips. They're seen as the direct result of Resolution 1701 not being enforced. A physical forward defense line to stop Hezbollah from creeping right back up to the border.
So you might be asking, why can't the Lebanese army or the UN just step in and do their jobs? Well, the analysis points to what's basically a power vacuum. The Lebanese government is seen as too weak to stand up to Hezbollah, and its army is just no match for them militarily. And the UN force, UNIFIL, its mandate is just to monitor and report. It has no teeth for enforcement. It's this vacuum that Israel feels it has to fill itself.
But the deadlock in Lebanon is really only half the story. Over on the Syrian front, the fall of the Assad regime didn't make things simpler. No, in fact, it created this whole new, bizarre paradox that revolves around the idea of sovereignty.
Here's a quick catch-up on the whirlwind of events there. Late 2024, the Assad regime just collapses. Ahmed al-Shara's forces sweep in. Israel immediately moves to lock down the border buffer zone and takes out all of the old Syrian army's heavy weapons. But then, the new Syrian leader al-Shara announces his #1 goal is to restore Syrian sovereignty over every inch of the country, setting up a head-on collision.
And this right here just lays out the new standoff perfectly. The al-Shara regime's whole project of building a new nation depends on being able to put its new unified army everywhere, including the south. But Israel is demanding that that exact area, stretching way south of Damascus, stays a demilitarized buffer zone, totally empty of that same army.
So here's the paradox at the core of the Syrian puzzle. The very thing al-Shara needs to use to prove he's a legitimate leader, his new national army, is seen by Israel as a massive security threat. And why? Because that army is mostly made up of former jihadist militias,
including al-Shura's own group, which, you might remember, used to be the official al-Qaeda branch in Syria.
And just like in Lebanon, this stalemate has created a new reality on the ground. 9 IDF forward positions on the Syrian side of the border. From Israel's point of view, the new regime just can't be trusted. So these outposts are there to physically enforce Israel's red lines, to control the security situation themselves.
So when you put these two fronts together, Lebanon and Syria, what do you get? Well, it leads us to the analysis's big conclusion, a new strategic doctrine it calls forward defense.
This table really just boils the whole puzzle down to its core elements. On the Lebanon front, the main obstacle is ideological. Hezbollah's identity as an armed group is simply not up for debate. Over in Syria, the obstacle is sovereignty, a direct conflict between Israel's security demands and Syria's basic need to build a state. In both cases, the analysis concludes that these gaps are just too wide to bridge.
And that brings us to the key takeaway from the analysis. This IDF presence in Lebanon and Syria, it isn't a temporary tactic to get a better deal at the negotiating table. No. It's being treated as a long-term, strategic necessity for managing a situation that's seen as, well, diplomatically unsolvable.
And this number gives you a real sense of the day-to-day friction. Since the ceasefire in November 2024, there have been over 1,200 reported Hezbollah violations. The source points out that the Lebanese army dealt with less than half of them, which left Israel to enforce the rest. And that, right there, reinforces the whole logic behind its forward defense posture.
So, what it all comes down to is a risk calculation. The analysis concludes that for Israel's security planners, the risks of staying put, of managing all this constant friction and international blowback, are still seen as lower than the risks of pulling back and leaving a vacuum that they believe an enemy would just fill right up again on their border.
And all of that leaves us with one last, pretty sobering question to think about. If this analysis is right, if this puzzle on the northern border really can't be solved with diplomacy right now, what does the future actually look like? What does long-term management of a conflict that has no clear end in sight really mean for everyone involved?